Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Our wise conversations are going to take us out on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery. We're going to be at Conrad's Crabs this week, but I finally have a great addition. Don Muller's going to appreciate this as we begin the recon. I'm going to have some Betty Boop scratch-off tickets to give away at Conrad's this week. Also presented in part, you'll like this, Don. My friends at Goodwill, our new sponsor, they sent me a little Goodwill truck. So I have this on the set now, so I have some fun things here. And our friends at Window Nation. We are going to be on the 18th, Don. And this is, we had several requests for the vegan crab cake. On the 18th of May, we are going to the Land of Kush downtown. This is a vegan restaurant, a black-owned local. A couple owns this restaurant. I can't wait to go down. Everyone tells me how great the food's going to be. Brooke Learman is going to join us on the 18th. I know you're a fan of hers as well, but we'll be there from 2 until 5. So the crab cake tour is taking a little bit of a detour. Somebody said to me, if it doesn't have crab in it, it's not really a crab cake tour. But I'm like, well, what do you do if you're vegan? What do you do if you're shellfish intolerant, right, Don?
Absolutely. And we know that a number of friends on the show are vegan and shellfish intolerant, and we want them to be able to be part of the crab cake tour.
I want to be pescatarian just because I like saying it. It just sounds fun. Pescatarian, you know. I mean, that would be fish, though, right? Well, that would be shellfish. Yes. May be different than pesca. It probably means you eat it, but if you're shellfish intolerant, you can't. So I know. Some people have a problem with shrimp. What can I say? It's been a hell of a week, Don. We're doing a recon, and look, man, we could talk baseball, football, draft, Preakness, Derby. There's a million things going on. We could talk about what's going on in the city and murders and crime and all that, but the Roe versus Wade thing, I know it eats at you because it really eats at your wife. I know it eats at me because it really eats at my wife. Let's talk about this because I don't know that we've ever had a legitimate conversation about, oh, they're going to take it away. There was always this fear, this thought, these wrong-minded people that are being sent to Washington. Let's start with that. But I didn't think in my lifetime we would have this conversation, right? Like the fact that the country's having this conversation over the last 3-4 days, and it's in everyone's home because everyone has someone who's a woman in their life.
No doubt about it. Will probably go down as one of the most consequential weeks in American history. Now, we'll see whether or not that is hyperbole. My sense is that it is not. And in the midst of all of this, Nestor, I think there are some really key points that are being missed. And I'm in the midst of actually opining about this now. I would encourage folks in the next few days to check into donmower.com and look at the latest Front Porch because we're going to address this head on. And I'm going to talk about what I think is being missed. And in terms of talking about what's being missed, I think we have to go back to the beginning, right? Because think about it. If you were under 50, you've never lived in a country, in a nation where a women's right to choose has not been accepted law of the land. So we go back to January 22nd, 1973, and the court decided a case involving a woman named Norma McCorvey, who in the pseudonym in the legal pleadings became known as Jane Roe. And in a 7-2 decision, decided that under the Due Process Clause in the 14th Amendment, that the right to privacy protected a woman's right to choose. Now, what often gets lost in that, Nestor, is even in that decision, the court did not find the right, and sometimes people don't recognize this part of the original ruling, and we'll also talk about Casey, which was decided in 1992, some 20 years later. But in the original ruling, the court did not find the right to be unlimited and said government could impose some restrictions. And at that time, they adopted what was called a trimester approach. And the court said that due to this right to privacy, that in the first trimester of a pregnancy, there may be no prohibitions whatsoever. Now, that's going to later be modified in the Casey decision. The court said in the second trimester that the court could impose, or states could impose, reasonable health restrictions. And in the third trimester, Roe basically said no abortions, however, put in exceptions for life of the mother. So often when Roe is talked about, those nuances don't get mentioned. So it's never been a total outright free for all in terms of abortion. Fast forward to 1992, and in the case where all of conservative America, what would be the pre-MAGA crowd, and all of the Federalist judges really thought in a Pennsylvania case, Casey versus Pennsylvania, that Roe v. Wade would finally be overturned, that Sandra Day O'Connor and Justice Souter and Justice Kennedy would join the Chief Justice Rehnquist and Scalia and Thomas and would end Roe v. Wade as we know it. At a moment of total outrage to the right, O'Connor, Souter, and Kennedy crafted a compromise provision that basically abandoned the trimester approach. It abandoned this strict scrutiny standard that Roe had, but it left in place a number of the provisions of the Pennsylvania case, particularly spousal notification. And I mean, I think, again, this is where I know you're going to head, is in terms of the inhumanity of some of this, right?
And well, it's a privacy. I mean, for the right. People wearing the red hats that scream personal rights, liberty, freedom, all of that this is where I get sideways on it. And listen, full disclosure here, okay? I've known you most of my life. You met me before I had a pregnant girlfriend, knew me when I had a pregnant girlfriend, knew me when I was a 15-year-old and 11-month parent, and I'm now 53 years old. So I had many factions pushing for an abortion when I was 15 years old. And it's not what I wanted, and it's not what Barry's mother wanted. And it would have been very, very easy at that point to push a button, send her up to City Hospital. We probably could have gotten a buy-in all around. All of our parents would have bought in. There would have been no problem. It's not what I wanted. It's not what Michelle wanted. It's not what we did. My son is over in Dundalk right now. So I am not some kill a baby person. I'm not even giving my own personal wisdom as a single parent, as a parent at 16, 17, 18, 19. I've been a parent for 37 years. I've been a parent longer than I've not been a parent, right? So I am case one for why you want abortion as an option. Because most of the parental people and grown-ups and guidance counselors would have said, you at least have to consider it in America in 1984. You're in high school, you're working at the paper, she's 3 years older than you, life's going to change, you'll forget about this, you'll cry a little, move on. Had a lot of people in my class, had a lot of religious people, a lot of religious relatives in my world, really religious people, telling my girlfriend then to get an abortion. Really religious people that spent the rest of their lives, they're gone now, that they would have been hard and fast with Trump and the Bible and the religious right. I know you to be a pretty Christian dude. You don't talk much about your faith. You're on the air. We brought it up a little bit at the holidays, but you don't wear it. You don't wear your cross out in front of you. But I know you to be anti-death penalty, and I'm different on that. But you would be in another world more on the line of pro-life, because you are a pro-life. You like life. You like all of that, but you also like freedom. And I don't think that if it was your daughter, your son, your grandchild, I don't know anything about your history in abortion. I've just, you know, born my soul a little bit. And it's not something I talked about as nasty Nestor. And, you know, people would see the kid and see how young I was and say, what happened there? And I'll do a Reddit on that one day, but neither one of us has any predilection to want to recommend abortions or think they're a particularly good thing. I have never been involved in one that I'm aware of, to your spousal consent. I have never participated in an abortion in any way, but I know plenty of people who have. And I know when I was put in that situation as a 15-year-old kid in Dundalk, your student, that was an option in our world, in my world, that would have changed my world, certainly would have changed Barry's world, that I can't imagine anyone in any community not having that. I would call it a privilege and a right to choose. But in this society where 70% of our population believes this to be not just the law of the land, believes this to be the way it has to be, this pushback, this is a real problem here, Don. To get to the politics of it, we've got too few people and money and these whack job states, and then just flat out lies. I mean, there's a television network every night with a guy who just lies, and people believe this ish. And now we're at a point where we're going to have coat hanger abortions. We're going to have states fighting for it. We're going to have people like Larry Hogan. When I get sideways with Hogan, boy, am I sideways with Hogan the last 48 hours on this, because he's pretending to run for president and trying not to be honest. He's not being he's not hitting the golf ball straight down the middle. He's full of ish on this issue, because he's not really taking a state stand, because that's what it's going to take now if this is what's going to happen at a federal level. And I've been soliloquying, but this has got me pretty pissed off. I mean, from an American, all the division we have here and all these problems, we do not need women in our country in fear of having sex, of getting pregnant, of having birth control that doesn't work, and then having the police involved, the federal government involved in my wife's, my son's daughter, my daughter-in-law's uterus. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's disgraceful, really, is what it is. And that anybody would sign off on this, it's gross. It's really gross.
So much to unpack in there, and I really appreciate, and I hope our listeners, and I'm confident that they will, appreciate your honesty and sharing your life story, because I don't think it's unlike many, many others. And
almost everybody in their life's had a pregnancy if they have sex, right? Like, let's be honest, right? Like, unless you can't get pregnant, you've either been involved in one, had one, you've been involved in many because your offspring have been involved in them, right? So this is a real human issue that cuts through that.
well,
Everybody's got a story. My wife might have a story that she doesn't even want to tell me, and her cousins might. And that's what this is set up to do. You don't have to talk about it.
that was
you don't have to talk about it.
That was the premise in the Texas case, Roe v. Wade, back in January 1973.
We got a pill for it now, Don, right? Like literally a morning after pill for it. Not that I'm recommending it, not that I've been involved in it, but somebody you know has been. And somebody I know has been, and somebody you're related to has been, and some 19-year-old girl that back in the 70s and 80s would have been slut shamed, right? That has taken that pill because it's allowed them to continue their lives and make decisions that are in their best interests. I made a decision. I made a really tough decision to be a parent at 15. Against all odds, against all advice, against all wisdom from the adults in my life.
Well, here to me, and I was trying to think how to articulate this in a way that's not boring and professorial, and to have folks understand the complexity of what I'm about to share. And that is that I think many people, most pundits and most elected officials are missing the key point here. And what I mean by that is almost every news story begins with a recitation of the polling on this issue in the United States. And while nuanced, there's a general consensus in the United States that Americans did not want Roe overturned. Now, Americans are at many different places about viability and where restrictions should enter, but big picture, they don't want Roe overturned. Now, here's my take on that. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. And I think we do our nation a disservice when we look at it that way. Because to me, constitutional rights, regardless of which side we line up on, are not supposed to be subject to the whim of public opinion. Example, whether or not it was okay for Black children to not be allowed to go to white schools should not have been subjected to a public opinion poll to decide that question. Whether or not Black people should be able to vote in the United States of America should not be subject to the whim of a public opinion poll. Whether or not Black people should be able to sit at the Reed's lunch counter on Howard Street and have a vanilla Coke and a hot dog should not be subject to the whims of a public opinion poll. And this is what we are missing. And it gets me back, Nestor, to what the Supreme Court is supposed to be. And
it isn't Sharia law, by the way.
Well, but how
far away are we from 3/5 citizens and women don't vote anymore? And rolling back the country to the 1800s. I mean, there are people in red hats with guns that I watched walk into the capital of our country 15 months ago, and the people that put it on, one of them is Supreme Court Justice's wife.
Okay.
He ran buses down there. And there's been nothing fundamentally done about the root of the problem. And the root of the problem are people doing illicit, violent, destructive, minority-based, and I mean minority not in black-white, minority in minority rule. There are less of them who think this way, imposing this on the majority of the people. And I don't think there's any question about that on Roe versus Wade. And I think we're getting to that point now on lots of national issues like cannabis. There's a lot of issues here that the minority has held sway over the majority for a period of time. And this goes back to the Senate. This goes back to representation in Washington, D.C., of which the people in D.C. have none of it, by the way, taxation without representation. But and the Puerto Rico situation and Guam and these other protectorates, how they are treated as less than whole to some degree. So there's precedent for all of this. Sure, there's precedent. You can roll everything back to 1776, where there's no mention of women or sex or anything in the Constitution. It was just a bunch of white guys getting together and making law.
Okay, but let's talk about how we got here to this particular court.
Texas. Let's start with that.
This is the point where I talk about what has happened to the American voter, in the sense that we tend to turn elections into
circuses.
What I refer to the old sort of Miller Lite commercials, right? Taste less, drink less filling, taste great, less filling. Which do we prefer? And elections are supposed to be, by their nature, much more serious events than that. And here's the example that I want to, I listen, I understand the likability factor, but I look at all my female Democratic voters, all my independents, all my moderate independents, many that I know and love, my moderate Republicans, my moderate Dems, who took a walk in 2016 and said, I'm not crazy about the Clintons. I'm not crazy about Hillary, and said, we just need to shake things up. I would suggest, and to those who are listening, please understand, I'm not in any way trying to demean your intelligence. What I'm suggesting, however, is that we need to understand at a much deeper level what consequences elections may have. Because since the early 1970s, a group called the Federalist Society, all across this nation, with chapters in every law school in the country, has had one purpose: to get conservative right-wing justices appointed to the federal courts so that they may limit individual rights. Now, and I apologize for blathering on, but it takes a little bit of an explanation. They call themselves originalists, so that if a specific right is not enumerated in the Constitution, they say then that right is not constitutionally protected and should be left to the states. Now, as our good friend, the Attorney General of the state of Maryland, pointed out recently on our show, originalists aren't always originalists if the issue doesn't float their boat. For example, on the Second Amendment, where the Second Amendment clearly refers to taking up arms as referring to a well-regulated militia and not individuals roaming the streets of our city, the originalists say, well, now they didn't really mean it then.
I think anybody that's going to be talking about stuff that people thought 250 years ago, it's so absent-minded, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous notion that Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin and John Hancock got in a room 250 years ago up in Philadelphia on horses and with lanterns and are dictating the way we should be living our lives in 2022. Right. It's absurd. I mean, that premise is absurd.
To think, well, but I want to take that concept, because I think you just touched on what is really the key component here. And that is, there are judicial philosophies that you and I would have, that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, and certain rights of Americans should not be subject to the whim of a focus group or a public opinion poll.
Don, think of how far science has come in 250 years.
Wait a minute.
Start with that.
This is an important point, because we need to make sure that people are voting with that in mind and not poo-pooing it. Because had those people who said, I don't like Hillary, had they liked Hillary a little more in just a couple of swing states, we would not have Brett Kavanaugh. We would not have Neil Gorsuch. We would not have Amy Coney Barrett.
Well, listen, you don't have to be a Democrat or an independent or Republican to see what happened with Garland at the end of the Obama administration, and what happened with the whack job from Notre Dame that they put in last year, before, at the finish line. that
And
it's two different sets of rules going on here.
But again,
it really is an integrity issue at the heart. You're negotiating with dishonest people.
Well,
I mean, literally.
See, here's where we would disagree a little bit. I don't think Amy Coney Barrett is a whack job. I don't think Neil Gorsuch is a whack job. I didn't think Antonin Scalia was a whack job. I think their judicial philosophy is very, very different than mine. And I don't think their judicial philosophy is good for the nation in that I think it leaves minorities, and I don't mean just racial, as you said earlier, of all shapes and sizes at risk. And as we wrap up this edition,
well, their minds are not the minds of America. They're the minds of rich white people in America who primarily Catholic, primarily of the same background. I watched Kavanaugh. I mean, Kavanaugh's just unfit. I mean, I watched 3 days of that and thought to myself, I wouldn't want this guy to be the judge of my traffic ticket, like, let alone to be a Supreme Court. He did not have the countenance, the makeup in any way to be a Supreme Court judge. I mean, that was on display. His anger, his demeanor, his posture, the things he said, the whining, not let alone who paid for his Nationals tickets and who funded it. But he was not. He lied. Now, here's really the key. These people lied. I sat and watched them. They lied.
But
and he struck me as the kind of guy who would lie. I know, especially when the woman came out 30 years later and said he raped me.
Well, it's a great. We're going to be talking about this for months and months and months. We'll stop here momentarily, but again, I want to suggest, Nestor. Yes, I hate the word lie, but did they mess with the truth in their Senate confirmations? Absolutely.
Mess with the truth. I mean, can't you just call a liar? I mean, come on. At what point does a liar become a liar? You don't like using that word, but when it happens, it happens.
Let me finish. I think, again, that the American people did not pay attention in 2016 because, number one, Donald Trump said he would only appoint judges from a list submitted by the Federalist Society. So we know what the Federalist Society means, and that he would only appoint judges who would be opposed to Roe v. Wade. So it is the old Maya Angelou story, right? Believe when people tell you who they are, believe them, that Donald Trump told us what we were going to get. And now we're going, oh my God, I can't believe this. So what I'm saying is, and I'll shut up and get out of here now, is that as we go to 2022 and as we move to 2024, folks, you're going to have a chance in districts all over this country to make a decision. What kind of judiciary do you want in the United States of America? And I would say this, Nestor, Chuck Schumer needs to get on the agenda right now, fast track it, do what the Republicans would do, put a protected right to abortion, codify it in United States law, and make every single, all 435 legislators in the Congress of the United States say yes or no, and then have voters decide if that's what they want. So therefore, if you're in the 1st Congressional District, state of Maryland, we know where Andy Harris will be on that issue. We know where Heather Mazur would be on that issue. So if you believe that, women should not have the right to choose in the United States of America, then Andy Harris is your guy. Let's get everybody on the record so voters have a clear choice. We'll talk about this a lot.
Well, I'll be
going
talking to
forward.
all these people as we get the crab cake tour going. You know that, Don. I mean,
There
this
we
is
go.
this is an ongoing conversation. This is why I jumped into this conversation 5-6 years ago, and we've just celebrated 3 years now of working together with Baltimore Positive. And I'm on the air, off the air, in Catonsville, Dundalk, Towson, and downtown. Very, very appreciative as we get through this.
We'll reach out, Nestor. You've got me thinking. We'll reach out to some of our law professor friends, whether that be Kurt Schmoke, Larry Gibson, whoever, Brian and Warnick. We'll reach out to some law professors and engage them, because this topic is not going away. And it's, you're right. My stomach has been in knots since the leaked document.
He is Don Moeller. That is the Recon. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking important issues, wise conversations in Baltimore Positive.